This is Jay Martin.
The sanctions on Russian financial assets, mainly US dollar, I think set a new precedent that the world's paying attention to. And central banks all over the world are likely, and they are, reallocating and rebalancing a little bit, lightening up on US dollars. Israel, for example, sold a bunch of US dollars. They purchased Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, and yen, I believe yen. Do you think this trend will continue? I look at the confiscation of 600 billion of USD as sort of opening the door to future action. Do you think the world perceives it that way as well?
Well, Jay, no international medium of exchange or reserve currency has lasted more than 100 years or so, maybe 125 years. The US dollar has been on top a long time, but unfortunately, many countries were already looking for an alternative because if you have a medium of exchange, it's supposed to be neutral. Anybody's supposed to be able to use it for anything. But unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I'm an American, Washington in recent years says, no, if we don't like you, we're going to cut you off. We're going to make it impossible to use the US dollar. So many people around the world say, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So they have already started looking for a competitor. What happened recently in Ukraine when the US just completely cut off anybody they didn't like and took assets. I mean, they just literally took assets from people, no trials, no anything. In fact, some of the people are not guilty of anything except being the wrong people. So this is now scared a lot of people, and many people are accelerating the move to find something to compete with the dollar. China, Russia, India, Iran, Brazil, many countries are saying we've got to find something else. The fundamentals of America are terrible. We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And now the politics are terrible because Washington can cut anybody off at any time, and that can ruin people. And if we're going to have a medium of exchange, international medium of exchange, it has to be neutral. So everybody's looking for something new.
So then let me ask you, what do you think is the strategy in Washington? Do you think this was just a short-sighted decision, or do you think it's a small part of a bigger plan and there's some longer time horizon actions in the pipeline? Like, what was the motivation, therefore, from Washington to weaponize the dollar so dramatically?
Well, the best I can determine is hubris or lack of understanding of how history works, of how the world works. In Washington, they say, listen, you do what we say because we're Washington. They're always saying there must be a rule of law. But what they don't then say is, but we tell you what the rule of law is. You cannot determine the rule of law. You got to listen to us. So people don't like that. I mean, as I say, whether you're friends or enemies of the US, you've got to be able to act independently based on facts. And when the facts are that if Washington doesn't like you for any reason, they cut you off. I mean, I hope it's just hubris. It looks like it might just be pure stupidity or lack of knowledge or arrogance. It may be just complete arrogance. As you may know, I don't think more than 30 or 35 countries have joined America on the sanctions against Russia recently. Most countries, by far most countries in the world, have not joined the sanctions, but Washington doesn't care. They say, listen, you do what we say or you will suffer.
That's right. 30 or 35 countries joined the US in those sanctions. There's a lot left in the balance in some major economies. And it makes sense when you think about it because, take Europe, for example, right? They have, said publicly they're going to wean themselves off of Russian oil and gas. And that's an easy thing to say, right? But once winter rolls around and it gets cold outside, it's harder to do because they don't have any other options. And so take that as an example. They'll probably, I don't know, maybe end up going back to the negotiating table with Russia and say, okay, we'll take what you're selling. And I look at if energy is the real currency of Russia, then maybe that's the conversation that the other, not these 30, 35 countries that have aligned with the US, but every other country is asking themselves is, look, we're heading into an energy shortage. where can we buy oil and gas? And Russia's a great example. I wonder if there's going to be a grander redrawing of the geopolitical power balances in the East and the West off the heels of this event.
Well, it already was taking place. I mean, I guess I know what's happened in Asia in the last decade or two. I mean, there are over 3 billion people in Asia. They're not big debtors, most of them. They have gigantic assets, and they're getting very successful. I'm not the only one who knows this. Most people seem to know what's happening in Asia. So the world is already moving towards Asia anyway. China's a very large trading partner with many countries in the world, whether we like it or not. Doesn't matter if we like it, Jay, it's happening. History is happening. History is marching on. So yes, this is happening. And the actions in Washington are just driving more and more people, are making more people examine their positions. And you're exactly right about oil and gas. I mean, the Germans are sitting here suddenly saying to themselves, what do we do now? We've closed our coal mines, we've closed our nuclear power plants, and now the Russians have cut off the oil and gas. So, I mean, not just Germany, but lots of people are suddenly faced with a serious, serious dilemma.
And the near-term access to energy isn't nuclear. It's got to be coal, right? Those are the easier plants to fire up, the easier energy source to turn on. Is that correct?
Well, coal is cheaper than nearly anything else, and there's lots of it out there, and there are lots of coal energy plants already. Many of them have been closed for the reasons, but now people are worried and starting. I mean, I'm a director of a coal company, and business is booming because everybody desperately needs coal now. And nuclear. I mean, nuclear energy is very clean and very cheap if you do it right. I mean, if you make a mistake, it's an unbelievable disaster. But nuclear is great unless there's a mistake. So people are now re-examining lots of things, and many people are now re-examining their attitude towards world trade and who they should be open to. The Germans, especially right now, are in a very, very serious bind. America's is having problems too. I mean, every day people are complaining about the price of gasoline in the US. It's going through the roof. And in Washington, they refuse to open. I mean, there's a major pipeline, but they refuse to open it. And they refuse to let people drill for oil and gas. And they refuse to let people mine coal or open coal. So Washington is just making it worse. But again, Washington, I don't know what happens when people go to Washington and they develop some kind of mindset that some people describe as arrogance, or others describe as ignorance.